Hi, good afternoon and welcome to another one of my architecture series videos. I thought what I would maybe do would be cover digital transformation architecture, a kind of then and now. And I'm just going to talk about the kind of high level pieces of it because it's just so complex that to take you down into low level detail you would probably just switch off. So I'm going to just talk about two areas that I think are the then and the now. So predominantly my experience is from digital background transformation. So things like internet banking, customer journey transformation, so moving people from a kind of face-to-face environment and maybe call centre, moving them into digital environments. There's a huge cost saving that businesses can make by moving their customer journeys into a digital world. So those kind of cost savings come out in the last few years have been assessed at as much as £15 per transaction for people for a face-to-face or a letter type transaction, down to something like £3 to £4 for a call centre transaction, right down to something like 10 pence for a digital transaction. So I guess that shows you how businesses can actually save money by looking at moving their channels, so basically the way people interact with their businesses. So two areas that I'm going to talk about. One is the monolithic architecture, and the other one is the microservice omnichannel architecture. So the monolithic is of sort of like 2000 to 2010 type era for me. That was looking at layers of transformation infrastructures. So an example, sort of digital banking, say for instance, it would have an internet connection, it would have a presentation layer, so web servers, it would have some firewalls there to do some security, packet inspection. Then there would be things like application layers to carry out business logic. You would maybe have some data messaging, so you would have synchronous and asynchronous, so you can look those ones up. You would have data layers, so you maybe have transactional databases, you would maybe have document databases, and you would maybe have data warehouses. And those were the kind of data layers that you would see kind of 10, 15 years ago. Some environments would have, in the kind of mid to late 2000s, would have integration layers. And by that I mean things like talking to, I'll say, Extranet. So that's like, as an example, a digital banking platform may want to talk to mortgage brokers, and that is a way of them integrating to external environments. So that's kind of Extranet. So that's like sort of going back out the internet pipe that banks would maybe have or businesses would maybe have. So that was a kind of integration or Extranet world that used to happen. So they used to be very separate from a channel perspective. So there'd be multi-channel. So you would maybe have a website, so a www. You would maybe have a call centre, and you would have branch, so it would be face-to-face, and maybe backed up by letters. But we wouldn't have things like text messaging or messenger services or any of these kind of automated services. So call centres would probably be more suited rather than what's called IVRs. IVRs is a process where you would have an automated telephone system. So that's kind of monolithic, so it would be layers, and it would be kind of top down, with those layers. So internet, presentation, application, messaging, data, and then integration layers. Most likely built in a network that wasn't attached to the actual business's operational network. So they tend to be segregated for security perspectives. So that's a separate monolithic view of digital world. So what does the new world look like? So what I've kind of seen over the last 5 years is more of an omnichannel presentation. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you're looking to take people in but not keep them just on one channel. So you're thinking about bringing them in maybe on a voice call, but you're maybe interested in moving them to a website, but maybe then moving them back to maybe SMS to get the answer. So that's an omni-channel journey. That's when you're taking people in on one channel, servicing them on multiple channels, and then maybe responding to them on a dedicated channel. It's not always like that, but that tends to what happened. I think in the early days, PayPal were very good with that, with eBay as a good example. So you would start off your complaint for your customer journey would be inside eBay. You would maybe move to PayPal, and you would maybe move from the web, you would maybe move to voice, and then you would move back to eBay. So that's like a good multi-channel or omni-channel presence move. So what does the microservice world look like in that? So it's really kind of quite different now from a digital perspective. So as I say, you're bringing people on in different channels and servicing them across different channels. You're not keeping them on solely dedicated into one channel. So things like maybe you hit the website, you would start the interaction on there, you would maybe have a customer reference number, and you would maybe then be using multiple services. So you maybe have access to Facebook Messenger bots that you might want to talk to somebody about your banking transactions, or you maybe want to talk about your insurance or something like that. Or it could be that your local council, you want to talk to them, so you phone their call centre and they suggest that they're then not available, do they want to call you back, so they send you a text message or something like that. So it's a very different dynamic. It's not as from a digital perspective those layers as much now. You can have things like the different channels to come in, so it might be like a customer relations management service, identity, so who you are and what you know. So that'd be how you're maybe identified. So there might be some data for that. It might be that there's transactional data, so the website has access to that transactional data, but it might also call what's called APIs, so application programming interfaces. It might use third-party services, so it might go straight back out the internet to actually go and look at your mobile phone records to check that you've made a bill payment. It's kind of how we see things like, how we see money managing products now and identities of things in your bank account. If you use some of the budgeting tools, these are kind of how they tag data. So that's kind of using APIs to look at different databases. So we tend to have things like multi data sources. So it could be less of that top-down approach, internet present the application layers. It's more a case of coming in on a channel, doing something in that channel, then maybe going back to some sort of management channel that's actually going to handle your inquiry or your correspondence. So we have still things like telephony, so we maybe have SMS and voice, and we have things like microservices. So that's when we have small pieces of code. So that might just be identify customer, that might just be check balance. So it's small, one little actions at a time, and that might just have a small amount of customer data, just enough to service that actual transaction and that actual inquiry. So that could be, multiple microservices are built out. And what we tend to do now is, as I talked about it in the agile world, we tend to build out what's called MVPs. So we try it. That's a MVP is the minimum viable product. So that's us working out what the minimum thing we can do to service a customer for that inquiry. So that might be log on, and that might be just check balance. And sometimes that's how you introduce these services. So those are some of the standard things that I tend to see in the old way of doing something. So very top-down layers and very channel separate. And the new microservice world, and as an example there, I'm talking about microservices. It could even be calling something like I talked about TripAdvisor before. It's a way to monetize other parts of the data within your business. It's for you to set up APIs that would other businesses might talk and call. So businesses are no longer one-trick ponies. They have data that can be used legally for other companies to actually mean that they don't need to write a service. So that's a good way now of rebuilding content and data that's actually reusable for other companies. So that's really it. Kind of what I've looked at is monolithic versus microservice omnichannel. I hope that's been interesting. I'd like to try and talk more about these individual areas, omnichannel and multi-channel, monolithic and microservices. But I want to just keep it very high level for today, and I'll maybe go into more of them in the future. If you get any questions or you want to know anything about any of the areas, feel free to have a look at YOLO architecture. My name's Paul, and hopefully I'll see you real soon.